Morning. I'm going to start with an apology because I've got both pugs literally sat on my knee whilst I'm doing this because they won't leave me alone. It's Wednesday morning and we've just been out for a walk and they're always really needy after that. I'm also going to start the podcast with a bit more of a conventional way of starting the podcast. Other people have adverts from all kinds of cool sponsors. We have no sponsors, obviously, for obvious reasons, but we are also still trying to sell beer candles whilst doing all of this. So I'm going to start the podcast with an advertisement from Beer Candles, the best that you could get. I mean, that's Gillette razors, isn't it? But just to set the ambience, have a little bit of a beer candle on the go. Alcohol-free beer that was. It was actually quite nice. Blood orange. Cool little can design. Blue sky drinking. Pretty cool, on fire. There we go. Right, let's get into it. First week of the Rugby World Cup. First weekend happened. Weekend just gone. We're now into the second week. Build up to the second round of games. So I'm just going to talk to you again a little bit about what I thought of the Rugby World Cup so far. It has been pretty cool, hasn't it? It's been different to what I think any of us were anticipating. We're going to start with the France-New Zealand game on Friday night. France definitely showed a bit of promise. My prediction from last week came true that I could imagine France doing it, and I'm absolutely buzzing that they did. It was definitely the outcome that I think keeps the rest of the World Cup interesting. I've heard lots of people saying that could be the game that starts the World Cup and it could also be the game that finishes the World Cup. It could be the bookends, as it were. There's every chance that we could see a France-New Zealand final, I believe, so that'd be pretty interesting. Just on the note of that as well, I went and met my mate Steve for a pint on Friday night, just before the rugby, and he gave me his opinion of why the ranking system that World Rugby have got is so terrible and why that is always going to produce terrible outcomes for groups like that. The past 3 World Cups we've ended up with lopsided draws. And he came up with a really simple point that I don't know why I hadn't thought of up until now, but it makes loads and loads of sense. Why not just rank the numbers of which number placed team would play who? So if first go into the same group, if the winners of the World Cup automatically go into the same group as number 10 on the list, set the numbers out, just give us a little template of what that would look like, and then literally 2-3 weeks before the World Cup, well, maybe not as extreme as that because people need to know who their like international team are playing against and stuff, but with far less build up, just announce at that point which teams are in those slots and who's going to play who. It would make so much more sense, and we wouldn't end up with a group like England and then a group like New Zealand and France and a group like Ireland, South Africa and Scotland, because that's the harshest group of them all. One of those 3 big teams is not going to make it through to the quarters, and that's a massive shame. So yeah, I've probably not explained that fantastically, but it does sort of make sense if you think about it. The teams get ranked in order from 1 down to however many international teams there is. They then automatically populate the places in the groups based on those numbers. Why we need to do it the way that we do it now just makes no sense to me or to Steve Errington. So big up Steve Errington for your wonderful idea. I think that was probably the only wonderful ideas that you had when I saw you on Friday. So I'm not giving you too much credit, but you definitely get some credit for that one and for buying me a pint of Stella. So what a boy. Yeah, so France-New Zealand, there wasn't a lot to say about that game sort of on the pitch. The bloody opening ceremony was like nothing I've ever seen before. People pushing wheelbarrows around on the pitch and all that jazz. The rugby wasn't much better. It wasn't the most exciting game. It was a bit more exciting for rugby purists out there, but it definitely wasn't one to get excited about if you were just a casual watcher. On the note of casual watchers as well, I feel quite sorry for people who are just casual rugby watchers, you know, decide to just tune in for maybe the odd Six Nations here and there and World Cups and Lions tours and that sort of thing, because further to my point last week, the game has changed enormously even since the last World Cup. Because I am a massive rugby nose, when I get a little bit of time to myself, I quite often sit and watch back old rugby games. When we're saying old, I mean like old as in my lifetime, not back to the 90s, because that was like a completely different sport, but sort of early 2000s game. I watched the England-France Six Nations game yesterday from 2005. That was an absolute stonker of a game where France won and England were doing all they could right up until the 80th minute to turn it over. And you watch rugby like that, and I'm not one of these people that's going to moan on shitloads about the high tackle stuff, but some of the decisions from over the weekend have been absurd. The inconsistency, I know it's a World Cup, I know we shouldn't bash referees, but it isn't even the referee's fault. It's the decisions that have led up to making these laws the laws. It's absurd. I've seen loads of things flying about on Twitter about how intent isn't important in in decision making. It isn't, but as somebody that's done 2/3 of a law degree, intent is pretty important when it comes to making decisions upon sentencing and decisions on the level of offence that somebody's committed. If that can be applied in the normal law, I kind of do think that it should be applied in the on the field law. Like Tom Curry's tackle on Saturday night, and I'm not bitter about this because I'm an England fan. I'd have been saying the same thing, whoever it was. Tom Curry's tackle on Saturday night did him less favours than anyone else. He is not wanting to tackle that Argentinian man with his face like that. Like, if you've seen his face after the game, he split his eyebrow open, there's blood everywhere. It isn't what he's wanting to achieve. It is just purely bad luck, bad timing, and it's not anything that Tom Curry himself can do anything about in that moment. Alternatively, though, you then get things like Carreras hitting George Ford late. That would have been a penalty even 10 years ago, just for tackling a man off the ball. Jumping up, hitting him in the face with your arse. There is a definite level of risk in that as well. I'm not saying that he's out to cause any harm either. It's a game of rugby. Like, we're all on the pitch for 80 minutes to try and do what we can to overpower, out-muscle, out-physical the other team. It's a game of attrition, as people like to say. But basically, it's a legal fight with a ball thrown in the mix. It's big, giant men or women trying to kill each other and get the ball over the try line. It's the simplest game in the world. So yeah, I just think it is important. I know it's not actually part of the laws that have been devised, but I believe that it should be part of the laws that have been devised. There is a difference between somebody who continuously makes high, upright tackles. Often that is a sign of physicality, and sometimes it's just a sign of laziness, and sometimes it's just a sign of being 6'6" and trying to tackle a man who's 5'8" and is also trying to slide to his knees. So I think it's a little bit of common sense needs to be applied in some of these. Tom Curry's potentially could have been a yellow card. I'd have been more than happy with that being a yellow card. I still think it's one of them where the game's a bit soft, even if that is a yellow card. Tom Curry does not want to smash his face in like that. There's every chance that off the back of that, he would need to go off for a HIA as well. It was a head clash. Like, it happens in football, two players going up for a header. It is just one of those things. It is purely a rugby incident. And I think it must not be great for the casual watcher to have to go through all that. It turns it into a bit of a pantomime. They don't want to watch a legal drama, otherwise they'd put Judge Judy on. They want to watch a game of rugby. And I think it's the rugby world, world rugby's job to try and put on a showcase for them, because we are ultimately supposed to be trying to grow the game. But I'll get onto that another day, because growing the game isn't all it's cracked up to be. We don't need more new people in rugby. It would be nice if they wanted to come over, but what we actually need is to keep the people that we've got. And from personal friends and family and stuff that I've seen online on Twitter, on Facebook over the past couple of days, especially over the weekend, there is a lot of people that are saying, the game's gone soft. And the people who've played the game for, it's a mixture of people. It's people that are my age, that are late 20s, early 30s, that have played the game since they were teenagers. And then it's people that are older, that are playing sort of second team, third team men's rugby, that have played the game for sort of 20, 30 years. So we should be taking the opinions of people like that into consideration, because ultimately they're the people that are playing the game and are unfortunately stepping away from the game. But yeah, rather than ranting on too much about that, because I could talk about it all day. How good was the England game? As an England fan, immediately at the full-time whistle, I was probably caught up in the moment of it all and a bit happier about it than I am looking back in hindsight. George Ford gave an absolute masterclass in how to play 10 when your back's against the wall. We lost our number 7 2 minutes into the game. A big load of striking power, which we needed against Argentina. And the way that he played that game is exactly what we needed. He managed to calm things down when things needed calming down, managed to give Manu the ball when we needed to sort of just set it up and go again. A few lovely turnovers from Courtney Laws. I think all the forwards stepped up and gave George Ford the sort of platform to be able to bash those kicks over. I did see Andy Good say the other day that you don't see two better drop goals than them first two from Fordy, and I think he's probably right. It takes a lot of balls and a lot of bottle to do that. I've also seen maybe him being given the reins and Farrell not being on the pitch. It's given him a little bit of confidence. I could definitely agree with that as somebody that spent quite a bit of my rugby playing career, not through my own choice. I was a back row number 8 to begin with, but ended up playing 10 for quite a lot of my adult rugby life, and it is a bit intimidating if you've got somebody who's always the big knob and you have to take over and play the game that you would. I think that they do play very different games, and I think that maybe a bit of confidence building in Ford and then Farrell coming back into that mix as well can only be a good thing. But you do see the moments from... I'm a massive Owen Farrell fan, but there was that famous incident in... I can't remember who England were playing where was it South Africa? And we managed to beat them last minute. A few years ago now, Danny Cipriani put a lovely little kick in. It looked like he was just kicking the ball away, kicked it straight to the winger, ran in and scored. And the camera panned to Farrell just as Cipriani's... kick had left the ball had left his boot, and Farrell's literally got his head in his hands like, what the fuck have you done, Cipriani? And then it turns into an amazing try. So I think, you know, Owen Farrell has definitely got his place in the England team, definitely got his place as a captain and as a leader, and he'll obviously be doing loads of stuff behind the scenes, a bit of coaching and whatnot as well, you imagine. And I think he does drive a lot of that physicality. But to give Fordy the reins, it was interesting to see how that game played out. And I think the England team that took the field against Fiji last week might not have won that game. Having watched the game back as well, Argentina were absolutely shite. A decent Argentina team turning up on the day. They basically just got every decision that they could make at every point wrong. They were just picking the wrong option. They definitely could have beaten England if a different Argentina had turned up on the day. But that's rugby and that's life, isn't it? You can only play and deal with what's in front of you. But yeah, for anyone that is a casual watcher, drop goals aren't a new invention, and drop goals aren't only allowed at World Cups. It seems like that's probably the case, given that it's normally World Cups that we see drop goals at. It's a little bit of the magic of the sport. George Ford led renaissance there with the drop goal, and I wonder if we're going to see any more from both England and the other teams at the World Cup throughout the World Cup. I think that we might. It's a really good tool to use to build up the score. And I think to go back to the 2019 World Cup final when we played South Africa, they basically out-muscled us on the scoreboard to begin with. They just kept the pressure on and kept squeezing us. And drop goals are a good way of doing that. If every time you get into the opposition's 22 or even into the opposition's half, you can come away with 3 points. It's no different than crushing them with penalties. So, aye, fantastic. On the note of penalties as well, England only gave away 7 penalties, which is mad considering they got given a red card 2 minutes into the game as well. So discipline-wise, we've absolutely smashed it compared to last week. I'm positively optimistic. We're pretty much definitely going to get through to a quarter-final. I did see some funny things on Twitter over the weekend. There's a lass called Catherine Kavanagh who's Irish, who tweets some hilarious things. She's obviously very pro-Ireland, which is completely understandable, but she tweeted something along the lines of insinuating that for England to score those 3 drop goals and us to celebrate like we've won the World Cup is a typical English thing to do. It was along those lines. And just on the note of that, I mean, it's hilarious, isn't it? 2 weeks ago on Twitter, if you'd have had a little look, England were the worst team in the world, no chances of anything, sack Steve Borthwick, get rid of the lot of them, overpaid, etc, etc. You know, managing to fight our way to a win without even scoring a try against Argentina, and we're suddenly the best team in the world, and people wonder why the rest of the world thinks that the English are arrogant. I am English, and we are arrogant, and we are as fickle as it comes, so, you know. On the note of being arrogant, or maybe not arrogant, maybe more on the note of being angry, Australia, Eddie Jones, what are we saying? The man's a weapon, isn't he? He just keeps becoming more and more of a weapon as well, and he can't stop himself. But it's great optics for the sport, and I think that I'm firmly of the camp of rugby needs to have as many characters as possible. If the character happens to be Eddie Jones and the man's penis, then still happy days, isn't it? It's something to watch. I'm sure he's a far better person than he makes out a lot of the time in his little jokes and jibes and whatever at press conferences, but he's certainly good value for money. He's a little bit of a pantomime villain type of character. I've put down here that I actually think that Georgia lost rather than Australia won. Obviously, the scoreline kind of suggested, if you hadn't watched the game, that Australia did do a lot better than that, but they didn't. I didn't think they were very good, and Georgia butchered every opportunity that they had in the game. And it was one of them where if they'd scored a couple of tries early on, which it looked like they had in them, it could have been a very different game. I do still think that Australia would have won, but I just don't think they would have won by the margin that they did. And it might have put the fear up them a little bit more for playing Fiji, because after that Wales-Fiji game, I would be quaking in my boots if I was Australia. Fiji were class. In my opinion, they probably did deserve to go on and win it. It was very 50-50. Wales's defence alone was enough to maybe win them the game. That Josh Adams tackle, Dan Bigger telling George North and Nick Tompkins to get the fucking ball off the pitch at the end of the game. I've seen loads of people criticising him for that. People that are criticising him for that are people that haven't played rugby, and definitely people that haven't played fly half or attempted to lead a team. There's nothing more frustrating in the world than watching it capitulate before your eyes. In fairness, it's usually the forwards that fuck things up for you, dropping the ball or, you know, giving away silly penalties and silly turnovers. But I had a bit of sympathy with Dan Bigger in that moment, and people are only even hearing about it because, you know, the ref's running along with a mic on and you can hear what's going on the pitch. Maybe the swearing isn't great for kids to hear, but again, it's a contact sport. People are going to be swearing. If the ref's got an issue with it, he could be like, Dan, watch your language. But again, I love that sort of thing. It's what rugby's about. He's probably the most passionate man in rugby. And I think a little bit of niggle like that is great. Wales managed to sort of play the referee into that result as well. Matt Carley was actually getting annoyed with the Welsh, and you could see that he was getting annoyed with the Welsh. And it's almost like he started penalising them for things that maybe didn't need to be penalised for, and then realised that he maybe gone a little bit too far. I think there was a little bit of a case of that. But hats off to Wales for a defence like that. It had definitely had shades of the England Fiji game a couple of weeks ago, but obviously Wales just did enough to manage to hold Fiji out, which we couldn't do. But yeah, I think there's still more drama to be had in that group. I definitely think that Fiji could turn Australia over, which would be really interesting. I absolutely fucking love them. They're my favourite team. I've said all along that Scotland were going to be my second team for the World Cup, but the Fijians are a different level. They just play the most exciting rugby. They make rugby fun. They've got some absolute huge monsters out there, and I think it's what rugby's supposed to be about. It was so good that even my girlfriend was sat watching me with it, and she was reading her book and not really paying any attention to it. And when the clock started to wind down, I was like, Fiji, maybe going to do this. This is dead exciting. And I was explaining to her what a big deal that would be. She kind of got into it as well. And then when they butchered that last try scoring opportunity, yeah, it was a bit of a head in the hands moment, wasn't it? But that level of drama is what you want. If it can make someone put the book down and look up from the page and decide to watch the rugby for 10 minutes, someone who hates rugby, they must be doing something right. On a note of something else that I've noticed from that game, I'm not going to moan about Wales not getting a yellow card and Fiji getting yellow carded. It is one of them things, isn't it? It's maybe a bit of a mistake. Who knows what's going through Matt Carley's head in that. I don't actually think it would have made a difference to the outcome of the game. The thing that would have made a difference to the outcome of the game is them not dropping the ball on the wing, and you can't do anything about that. No amount of penalties and yellow cards change the narrative on that one. But yeah, I do think they were maybe robbed ever so slightly, but it was still a great game of rugby to watch, wasn't it? One thing that I did notice in that, and one thing that I think it's been mentioned by other people in the past before, but with the whole head injury stuff and the head contacts, the Welsh scrum half, I'm not sure who it was that was on at the point, I think it was maybe Gareth Davies, was on the floor holding his head because he'd had a bit of a shoulder to the head, and the Fijians ended up getting penalised because of the head contact. In that case, if his head's so sore that he's needing to roll around holding his head, should he not be going off for a HIA? Like, we need to try and stop the milking of penalties, because the lads themselves on the pitch are going to do things like that because it's going to get their team a penalty. Like, you'll do anything to get your team a penalty, and if it means manipulating the laws a little bit like that, then you're maybe going to do it because it's test match rugby, it's World Cup rugby. You'll do anything to get a win. So if we stamped that out, it would stop people from doing it. I don't think for 1 minute that the lad himself is soft and he's rolling around pretending that he's hurt for his own ego or anything. He's doing it to try and milk a penalty. If he knew that the outcome of that was that he would have to go off for a HIA for 10 minutes, then he has to go off for a HIA for 10 minutes, doesn't he? Like, that's the thing. And I think he actually did end up going off for a HIA, so it's quite a good, but it was still about 5 minutes later. It's quite a good way of looking at it because it does happen frequently, and the player on the receiving end of the head contact isn't made to go off for the HIA. It would maybe swing things back into a bit more of a sensible place if the player that was injured or had received head contact had to go off for a HIA when that had happened. It's just something to think about, and it might have made a little bit of a difference, especially for things like that Tom Curry incident. He got fucking whacked clean in the head. Both of them did. Like, players in that situation maybe need to go off for a HIA. Again, with the George Ford Carreras thing, Carreras jumps into him, smashes him in the head with his ass. If that was deemed bad enough to be a red card or a yellow card, and George is rolling around on the floor, which he won't do because he's a hard little man, he then would need to go off for a HIA, in my opinion. So then both teams are down a man. Obviously, England get to bring someone back on in his place, but it would stop the few times where it is just milking a penalty a little bit. What else have we got here? Scotland. Never been more excited and then disappointed in my life. They had a reasonable start to the game. It was looking decent in that first 40, to be fair, but the second 20 of the first 40, so that's that second 20 minutes, they were really building a bit of ascendancy. They were turning South Africa's scrum over, and then they just had like a colossal sort of communal brain fart to decide to try and run that ball in rather than giving it on the wing. I think he's going to be cursing himself for that for quite a while, because if he'd give the pass at the right moment in that moment, they would have scored. And I think that it might have swung the momentum a little bit, because, like I said earlier, sometimes playing South Africa is like just being in a headlock and they're just squeezing tighter and tighter and tighter. Scotland scoring when they did would have been like getting your hand in the headlock and managing to push it away, just for a little bit, and sometimes that's enough to keep them on the back foot. Manny Lebok with that no-look kick pass, unbelievable. When you do it in slow-mo, that is one of them things that, again, for a casual fan, you want to see, because, and even as a big rugby fan and someone that's played rugby, it just makes him look so cool, doesn't it? Like, it's a split second where he's decided to take his eyes off what he's looking at, off where he's going to kick the ball, slotting it over perfect. It's spot on. On the note of Manny Lebok as well, I don't know whether you've seen Sia Khaleesi's press conference after the game, where they were being asked about the game, obviously, and about Lebok's kicking off the tee, because it wasn't great. There was beating Scotland by a lot more. I think it was at least 9 points out there, possibly more than that. It might have been 11 actually, because I think they missed a conversion as well. And Sia defending him and saying, look, that's what happens as part of a team sometimes. Manny Lebok's on the field to do so much more than just kick, and that's so important. How many teams do you see these days that swap kicker if their kicker's missed a few? It doesn't happen at the pro level, but in local league rugby and in all the rugby I've ever played, it happens all the time. If I was having a bad day at the office off the tee, you don't just keep going, you give it to someone else. Doesn't mean that you're going to get the hooked stick out and be yanked off the field. Like, you're meant to be on the field for more than just your kicking ability. But for Sia to come out and defend him in front of the press is cool. I think that's, again, what rugby is supposed to be about. I still think Scotland have maybe got enough in them to do something against Ireland. Ireland are the classic World Cup chokers. They've never got further than a quarter final. I do unfortunately think that South Africa and Ireland will make it out of that group, but a big part of me is thinking that Scotland might do Ireland, and you never know what could happen off the back of that. The last thing that I'm going to sort of say, another thing, the second to last thing, was Chile's first World Cup, which is pretty cool. Scored the first try at a World Cup, which is awesome. I'm excited to see how the rest of the World Cup plays out for them. Georgia were disappointing, and I think that they could have done a lot more than they in fact did do. I don't know whether this World Cup is rife for an upset like Japan beating South Africa. I don't really know whether something like that is going to happen. It could happen. I can't really see where it's going to come from. Georgia could do Wales. I do have a suspicion that Georgia could beat Wales. They have beaten Wales already this year. They beat them at the Principality as well, which is pretty mad. So we'll see, but they'll need to play a lot better than they did against Australia. But yeah, it's interesting. I've also got written down here, I don't know whether any of you have watched it, but I name-checked them last week. Egg Chasers Rugby Podcast, it's been going for 10 years, best in the business. Tim Cocker's been doing some unreal work. He's been out actually in the field. He's over there in France because obviously he does a bit of commentary and punditry stuff as well. He works as like the announcer guy on BT Sport and does the interviews for Man of the Match and that sort of thing. I can't remember what the real word for it is. But rather than having this flaccid, ridiculous coverage from ITV, it has been shocking. The pre-match build-up has been boring as sin. They've had them stood there on lecterns. They've rolled out the usual Johnny Wilkinson, Clive Woodward. Boring. The most boring people in rugby. They won the World Cup in 2003. Johnny Wilkinson will always be a hero, but he is not the man that you want in that situation. And Clive Woodward certainly isn't. Why have we not got people that are actually more current to the game, people that actually have some sort of an opinion, a divisive opinion, people who are going to stand up and say something? I know he's been battered this week on bloody Twitter, but Nick Knowles, DIY SOS, massive Gloucester fan, he's been under fire because he's been out there spouting off about Wales and the Wales-Fiji game. But I love that. You've got to have a little bit of character in there, and you've got to have people that are willing to stick their head above the parapet and say something controversial. On the note of Nick Knowles as well, and him being a Gloucester fan, I promised that I would give a little name drop to my big sis, Lenny, because she wanted me to mention her, given that I've mentioned Snook the last couple of weeks. Len, I hope you go and find Nick Knowles and go and have a pint with him, get a controversial opinion off him, take your phone with him and interview him, and we'll stick it up on here. Lenny's a big Gloucester supporter, and well, she's actually also a Plymouth Albion supporter, which causes all kinds of issues because Plymouth are in the same league as DMP, who my brother plays for. So there has been times where I've been forced into a box at Mowden wearing a Darlo shirt, which obviously always goes down well, and Lenny's in there with her Plymouth shirt on, so we're a chamber full of revolters when that happens. But yeah, big up to Lenny. Hopefully see you soon for a little pint and you can give me your opinion on the Rugby World Cup so far. As a gobby scrum half and a now fully qualified referee who's making all kinds of great shakes in the rugby world, you might have done a better job than some of the guys this weekend, eh? But yeah, I think that's what rugby needs. It needs characters. It needs people like that are going to come out and say controversial things. Tim doesn't particularly say anything controversial, Tim Cocker from Egg Chasers, but the coverage that he's been doing is fantastic. He's been putting little 9-10 minute clips up daily, sometimes a couple of times a day. He's been at the majority of the games, but there was something that he did that I thought was fantastic. After the England-Argentina game, he went and stood in the car park at the ground and interviewed fans as they were coming out, pissed people who were just being knobheads, as you can imagine. He handled it all brilliantly, and it was so much of a better watch than some of the stuff that goes on the big national coverage. I think this World Cup has changed the tune for how rugby World Cups are going to be reported upon. That sort of thing throughout the Six Nations would be unreal. We need people to be doing that. We need people to be doing that in the men's rugby. As a woman that's played rugby for however long, there is plenty of characters in women's rugby, and there's plenty of characters in women's rugby that aren't just elite athletes from that top end. You need to get some people in there sometimes as well with a bit of personality, with a bit of experience in the game. And, you know, it would be cool if places like ITV decided to have like little fan corners where you could go and speak to the fans. And I don't mean your typical England fans, Barber jackets. They've taken 100 kids with them. They're not really there for the rugby. They're there to show how posh they are and eat prawn sandwiches and all that. I mean people that actually enjoy the game, people that are sat in a rugby club in the north of England watching the game with their mates, a load of rugby girls, a load of rugby lads. I think it'd be fantastic, and I think if there's any scope for that, it's definitely something that the Egg Chasers guys should be used as sort of the template for. I've seen Big Jim doing a lot of decent stuff as well, Jim Hamilton, doing some stuff on the pitch before the game, and you know, even this week him interviewing Daddy Cipriani about his new book, just speaking to the characters and speaking to the people in the game that make the game more interesting than it just being the old typical fuddy-duddy rugby union style stuff. And I think rugby league, looking across at the other form of rugby in this country, that's a great place to start. Danica, who used to play for Leeds Rhinos, she also used to play rugby union as well. I've played rugby union against her when she was playing for West Park Leeds. Fantastic person, fantastic character, and she's risen through the ranks in the past couple of years because she talks about rugby. She's got some experience. She's also got the banter. She's happy to sit and talk with the old blokes about rugby, and I think that's fantastic. And I think that there needs to be more of that in the game. I know ITV roll out like Maggie Alfonsi and stuff, and she does come out with some controversial things on Twitter sometimes and things that put her head above the parapet. So absolute hats off to her for that. But I think we need more of it, and I think we need the diversity in the game is not the diversity in the game that the RFU think that we need. But that's an entirely different story. We need diversity that means people from all sorts of backgrounds across this country to talk about what rugby's like as a 30-year-old woman who plays rugby at Championship 2 level, for example. But yeah, that's enough of me ranting on about that. I mean, the last thing on that actually, ITV putting the captions up for who's talking. One of the only interesting people that they got on to speak was bloody George Gregan. They ended up calling him Sean Gregan. I know mistakes are made, but I mean, it's just amateur, that, isn't it? And if you're going to put that up, make a joke about it, like later on, say something about it, because it's laughable, really. But yeah, anyway, and on the note, one last point on this, Gareth Thomas on TV, absolutely not a chance. Trying to introduce diversity, all the LGBTQI plus stuff into rugby, fine, whatever. I have my own personal opinions about some of that. I am obviously a lesbian, and there's a lot of lesbians play rugby. There's also a lot of gay men that play rugby. The transgender thing is an entirely different setup. It's not something that I'm going to talk about on here because I think my opinions would be a little bit controversial. But Gareth Thomas, he was for years and years the face of Stonewall. You know, gay men can play rugby too. Gay men can look like this. They don't have to all look like Louis Spence and be mincing around. Big fan of all of that idea. It's good. But some of the things that have come out about his personal life and some of the things that he has been in court for, you need to go online and read it for yourself. But the man should not be an ambassador for anything to do with gay rights, anything to do with HIV. And I'm not going to say any more than that, but he's on there laughing and joking. And I'm not normally one to try and be like, oh, cancel people, they shouldn't have their job anymore. I just don't think that he's a great role model for our game. And he should almost come with a disclaimer. You wouldn't have someone on the TV who was a wife beater, who was a known wife beater, for example. But who knows, maybe ITV would. I also apologise because I think this entire time that I've been talking, you can hear a weird snoring noise. I listened back to last week's pod and all I could hear was grunting. I will show you where the grunting is coming from because it's ridiculous. She's laid here asleep, little sleepy baby. And I think she's featured in every time I've done a podcast. She's featured in it. You okay? She's the sleepiest girl in the world. So on to next week's games. We've got a game tomorrow night, France v Uruguay. Big French win, that's all you can really see there, but there might be some exciting rugby played. Mix the team up a little bit, I'm sure. Friday, that's at 8 PM Thursday night, so it's nice to have a bit of Thursday night rugby. That's definitely something the Premiership rugby should look at, is a little bit of Friday night rugby. Yeah, it's Thursday night rugby and Friday night rugby, obviously. Friday, New Zealand v Namibia. That's going to be like some sort of gang fight, isn't it? Saturday, Samoa v Chile. That could be an interesting game. We haven't seen a lot from either of those teams yet, so it'd be interesting to see how playing against each other, what that's going to look like. Wales v Portugal as well. We've not seen Portugal play yet, so that's 4:45 on Saturday. Could Portugal do it? Could Portugal beat Wales? Maybe, who knows? Depends if Matt Carley's refereeing or not. And then Ireland v Tonga. Little bit of a disappointing Saturday of rugby that. Ireland-Tonga will be a decent game. Tonga have obviously got an awesome team now. So we'll see. But obviously can't really look past an Ireland winning that game. And then Sunday is probably the biggest day of rugby this weekend. We've got South Africa against Romania. Again, that's going to be an arsehole, isn't it? Australia v Fiji, which is the game that I am absolutely buzzing for this weekend. I'm firmly a Fiji fan. I'm considering trying to do something to my hair to make me look like a Fijian. I'm only joking. But yeah, my money's on Fiji for that game. I genuinely do think that they could do it, and I think that most of the rugby world will be behind them as well, because Australia are not very likeable at the moment with big Eddie the knobhead in charge. So we shall see, but come on Fiji. And then England v Japan. Japan have been giant killers in the past. I can't see them doing it this year to England, but who knows, stranger things have happened. But yeah, just happy to be firmly into the swing of the Rugby World Cup. Happy that England have got a win under their belts. Before the game, I was like, not asked if they get beat. I can wallow in the pity of that a little bit. Now that they've won, you know, the semis are not an impossibility, and if the semis are not an impossibility, neither is the final. And it would be the most ironic thing in the world for England to go and win the World Cup this year when they didn't stand a cat in hell's chance, and we were the best team in the world in 2019, and we got arseholed in the final by South Africa. So one thing that's for certain in rugby is that it's uncertain, just like the way the ball bobbles around on the pitch. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know where any game's going to go. It's one of the most unpredictable sports in the world, which is cool. And you don't know how the narratives are going to be changed with red cards, stuff like that. So yeah, excited to get into it. Second week of the Rugby World Cup 2023. Here we go. This week's drink recommendations. I reckon Thursday night you can't be having anything too heavy. Another nice little French red. Uruguay, there's some nice meat out there, so maybe a little steak and red wine night. I'm sure your wife will be happy. New Zealand v Namibia. I don't think that's going to be a great game, to be fair. I don't think there'll be much to watch there. Maybe a couple of little New Zealand beers. Who knows? Samoa v Chile. Again, Chile and red wine. Wales v Portugal. I think that Portugal could do that. I'm going to have a Portuguese tart, and I'm going to pray that Portugal beat Wales. And Ireland v Tonga. A couple of pints of Guinness. Obviously it's Ireland. Tonga, there's a lot of strong black men on that pitch, so a pint of Guinness would be perfect. South Africa v Romania. Pointless, really. South Africa are just gonna dick them. Australia v Fiji. Get all your beers ready. Get the champagne in the fridge. Fiji are going to do it. England v Japan. Some Japanese sake. A little bit of sushi. But ultimately, it's a Sunday night. We're English. We do still want England to win. Can you have sushi on the side of a Sunday dinner? Who knows? But you can definitely have a few pints of lager. Japanese if you want it to be. A bit of sushi, some wasabi, and revel in the fact that it's another week of World Cup rugby. Happy days. I am looking for people to come on the podcast with me to talk about rugby. Laura was caught up again this week. I am going to do a more beer candles related podcast with Laura. Hopefully maybe one night this week, or if not, potentially over the weekend. But if you would like to come on and talk about rugby with me, happy days. I'm always up for that. Drop us an email over beercandlesdarlo, DARLO, like the place, at gmail.com. Find us on Instagram at beer_can_dulls. Just type in beer candles, it'll come up. But yeah, my name's Sophie. This has been the Beer Candles Team BC Rugby Podcast, 2nd edition. This is a beer candle. If you want one, website will be on the screen now. And yeah, thanks for listening. Have a great week. Come on, England.